Okay, so let's talk about IK and FK switching. So what is it exactly? Well, the way this is going to work is, if you remember, we duplicated the leg joints 3 times. So we set up the IK, we've now set up the FK, and we still have the bind joint chain. Okay, so just to illustrate this, I'm going to kick my leg out like this on the FK side. I'm going to bring back my IK joints, and I'm going to bring back I brought back my IK controls, and I'm going to bring back the joints so that I can put this leg back here somewhere, you know, do whatever I need to do here. So this one in the front is your FK leg, this one in the back is your IK leg. And then if we bring out the bind joint chains, this one in the middle is my bind joint. So again, if you remember, the bind joint is the one that is actually going to be skinned to the character. So this is the one that's going to be running the character mesh. Okay, so the way that IK-FK switching works is, if we tell it that we want to be in FK mode, what it's actually going to do is that it's going to copy there's a rotate Y. I'm just going to copy that of negative 83 degrees in there. It's going to copy that value into the bind rotate Y. So if I put that in there, you'll see that hip joint is now perfectly aligned with the other one. And then this one here, there's a 30 undo. There's a 30-degree value in here in the knee, so I'm going to put a 30-degree value there. And if I do that, you'll see that now my left bind chain is now aligned perfectly with that FK chain. Okay, so that is how this is going to work. We're going to tell it that if we want to be in FK mode, we're going to align the bind chain to the FK joints and have it follow those joints. And then when we decide that we want to be in IK mode, we are going to then take the values in the IK chain and plug them into our bind chain, and then it's going to be following the IK chain. Okay, so we're just going to have it go back and forth like that. So it's a really convenient system, because it allows you to sort of blend between the two. So you can have a 50% blend, or you can have a 75 and 25% blend, or you can just do 100% blend one way or the other. Okay, it's actually really cool how that works. So how do we set that up? Well, we need to have a control with an attribute on it that allows us to go between one or the other. And what that will do is, when we've finished setting this up, is when I'm in FK mode, my FK controls are going to be visible. When I'm in IK mode, my IK controls are going to be visible. Okay, this is all we're going to set all this up. And we're going to tell it that when I'm in IK mode, I want you to find the values of the IK joints and plug them into the corresponding bind joints. And when we're in FK mode, find the values of all the FK joints and plug them into the corresponding bind joints that way. So it's going to be one or the other. So this is how we're going to do it. So I'm just going to zero these. Well, you know what? I'm going to leave these 2 legs posed this way, just to make it easy to see what is going on. So first we need to create a new control, which I like to put somewhere near the back of the foot here. And then I'm going to constrain that control to the bind ankle joint. So how do I make controls? You know, you can sit there and draw one in there, but if you want to make sort of fancy, I guess, controls, I like to use a character map. So I'm using Windows 10 here. I'm going to type here into Cortana. I'm going to start typing in character map, and it's going to come up. And click on that, and this is what we get. I'm going to open up the font here, and I'm going to look for Wingdings, which, if you know anything about fonts, you know that Wingdings is just a bunch of symbols. Do I have it on here? Yep, there it is, Wingdings. Okay, so these are all the different symbols that you can use for that. Okay, so I like to say that guy. You know, it can be whatever you want. It really doesn't matter. So you can pick that one, hit select, okay, and then I select that and I copy it, and then come back into Maya and I go to create, type, hit that, and this is what happens. And you know what? I'm going to make sure I save before anything crashes. So it creates a 3D type geometry there. So in the attribute editor, I'm going to go to type 1. I'm going to delete 3D type, and I'm going to paste that symbol that I got out of the character map. Now you might say, well, it's not the same symbol. That's because we're not using the same font. So if I go down to my fonts and then I find, and let's see, W, where is Wingding? Oh, wait. It's running slow. There's Wingdings, and you see when I switch it to Wingdings, I get that symbol that I pick from there. But I don't need it to be three-dimensional geometry. Okay, I need it to just be curves. So I'm going to go to geometry, and I'm going to turn off enable extrusion, which is going to remove the extrusion, but it's still a polygon. So I'm going to tell it to create curves from type. Okay, and when I do that, it creates these curves, and here's the original polygon. I'm just going to delete that. It's going to leave me with these curves. The problem is I have 3 separate curves. Okay, and they're all in this group here. And I want this to become one curve, so when I click anywhere on these curves, it selects the whole thing. So we have to do a little trick here with parenting. I'm going to right click in my outliner and turn on shapes. And what that does is now I can open all of these and I can see the shape nodes. Now I'm going to open up the bottom 2. I have these shape nodes here, and for the top one I'm not going to use the shape node. I'm going to use the transform node. Remember, there's a transform node and a shape node. I'm going to use a transform node. So I'm going to select both these shape nodes for the bottom 2, and for the third one, the top one, I'm going to select the transform node. This is very important. Then I'm going to type here in this little mailbox, I'm going to type parent -r space -s. So space -r space -s. What that's telling it to do is that we want to parent these 2 shape nodes under this transform node. This transform node already has a shape node. Now we want to add 2 more. So when I hit enter, you'll see that this transform node now has the 3 shape nodes underneath it, and these 2 transform nodes are now empty. So I'm going to delete those, and now I have this. And if I right click and turn off shapes, you'll see that now when I deselect it and click anywhere, it's going to select all 3. Okay, so that's a nice little trick to know. If you have compound curve controls that you want to become a single curve, technically, then this is how you would do that. So I'm going to hit Shift P and just unparent that from the mesh curves group, and this is what we have. Okay, I'm going to hold down D and just move my pivot up about in line with the point on there. Okay, and I'm going to hold down V and then snap that pivot point to my ankle joint. I'm going to rotate it, hold down J and rotate it 90 degrees. Just make sure that was a 90. Oh, 90. There we go. And then of course it's humongous. I don't need it to be that big, so I'm just going to scale it way down. Zoom in on it. You know, something like that, and then just move it back. Maybe bring back the character, just move it back to where it's selectable. Maybe something like that. Okay, and freeze its transformation so it zeroes out. I'm going to hide my character again, and I might just move the pivot point, hold on D and V and snap the pivot point to the ankle joint. Okay, let's duplicate it. Actually, before I duplicate it, let's change the color on it like we've been doing. Now, the difference here with this control is that because I parented, again, I'm going to turn on shapes here, because I now have 3 shape nodes under 1 transform node, you'll see that if you wanted to change color, so if I enable overrides here and change it to red, you'll see that it only does it for that particular shape node. So I would have to do it 3 times. So instead of doing it there, I'm going to go up to the transform node, which is poly to curve 1, and I'm going to go to display, drawing overrides, enable overrides, and now when I pick my red from here, it's going to do all three. Okay, so that's just something to keep in mind. Okay, so we're going to call this, what do we call it? There's my notes here. We're going to call this left IK underscore FK underscore switch. Okay, that's just tells us that that's our IKFK switcher. Okay, I'm going to duplicate it and hold down V and snap the duplicate to the right side. Freeze transformations, and then we are going to change the color of this one to our green, and there we go. And of course we need to make sure we rename this guy right IKFK switch and take the 1 off the end there. Perfect. So here, and let's go ahead and pose, just to get these separate these joint chains. We're just going to pose these, and let's put some rotations in all of these just so that we know that the switching is working. Okay. So now these two joint chains here are the bind joint chains. So I'm going to select my bind ankle, select this IKFK switch control, and do a constraint parent. Do the same thing here, hit G, so that if the bind chain moves, we want that control to go with it, just like that. Make sure it's working on both sides. Yep. Okay, save. Okay, so I'm going to select both these controls. I'm going to go to modify. I'm going to do an add attribute, and we're going to call this IK underscore F, or actually, you know what? Let's call it IK to FK. IK to FK. I'm going to keep it as a float. It's going to have a minimum of 0, maximum of 1, and hit OK. So if we go in the channel box now and select this, you'll see that I have IK to FK there, and on that one as well, I have IK to FK. Okay, and these of course are constrained, which is why we have these, and it's a parent constraint, because, and we know that because we have translates and rotates constrained. Okay, so now we have the control there. To do our IKFK switching, we need to set up the actual IK and FK switching. So to do that, we're going to use the node editor. Okay, 1 second. Let me just get to the right place in my notes here. So the node editor. So if we go to Windows and node editor, what we get is this here. And there's a lot of power in the node editor, because the way Maya works is that everything in Maya is basically a node, and it's all a bunch of nodes that are connected one way or another, and they create different effects. So one thing that I want to make sure that I set up before I even do anything in the node editor, I'm going to go to my preferences by clicking on this little orange guy here. Then I'm going to go to the node editor right there. And I want to make sure that I tell this to not put any shapes on there. And the reason I do this is anytime you load a node into the node editor, if it has a shape node, that shape node comes along with it, and it might start to clutter up your scene. So I'm going to tell it not to do that automatically. Okay. Then I'm also going to make sure that I have this set to full mode so that my nodes come in expanded. Otherwise they come in unexpanded, and then it's just an extra step for me to do. So just make sure that those two things are set up. Make sure it's no shapes, and make sure that it's in full mode, and hit save. The other thing I want to do, I want to go to options, and I want to pin all nodes by default. And the reason I want to pin all nodes is that the node editor has a bad habit of wanting to sort of reshuffle itself every time you make a connection. I'm not really sure why it was built that way, but it's incredibly annoying, especially if you have a really big graph. So we want to make sure that it pins all the nodes so that the nodes stay where they are. No matter what you do, they stay where they are. And then I think that's about it. Let's see here. And we'll tell it no shapes. We don't need grid snapping, but you can use it if that's something that you prefer to use, and I think that's it there. Okay, so the way the node editor is that we have tabs in here, and I'm going to double click this tab and call it IK. Can I use a slash in here? Let's see, FK switch. Yep, so this tab is going to be reserved for my IK-FK switching. There's a little padlock here, so once we've done our IK-FK switching and it works, I'm going to lock this padlock so that no other nodes get accidentally added to this node graph. So what we have here is this button here clears the graph. So if you got stuff on the graph, it will clear it. This node here with the plus adds selected nodes to the graph. This one with the minus removes selected nodes from the graph. Okay, so we need to add, let's start with the left side. So I'm going to select my left IK-FK switch. So if I hit this plus, you'll see that it's there. And because I think I might have to restart Maya here, but let's see. Did it? No, I guess it brought them both in for some reason. Let's let me just take them off and let's see. Let's do that again. So okay. I don't know why I did that the first time, but it is what it is. Okay, so there's our IK-FK switcher. The next thing we need to do is bring in the three join chains in order to be able to do our IK-FK switching. Now, I like to do them one by one. So if I'm working on the hips, I'll bring in all three hips. I don't want to bring everything in at once because it's going to clutter up my node editor view very quickly. So I'm going to select the FK hip, bind hip, and IK hip. And I'm going to add those in. And this is another annoying thing about the node editor is that it will put everything on top of each other for some reason. So I need to separate them out like this. So the way that I like to hook it up, I like to put my bind hip, which is this one. Let me enlarge this. Bind hip I put all the way on the right. I'm going to put my IK hip underneath my FK hip, and you'll see why in a minute. Okay, like this, and then this guy sort of floats around somewhere. Okay, so we need to tell this guy, the bind hip, to follow either the FK or the IK hip, depending on what this IK to FK value is set to. Okay, how do we do that? There's actually a really cool node in Maya that's called Blend Colors. And Blend Colors, the way I'm going to bring it in is I'm going to hit Tab. In here, I'm going to hit Tab and start typing in Blend Colors. And once I see it, I'm going to scroll down and then hit Enter. This is the node right here. I want to double click it then. And when I do that, it brings up my attribute editor with the blend colors node in here. So we have a blender attribute in here, and we have a color 1 and color 2. So it's usually used for, well, blending colors, right? You give it one color, you give it two colors, and then it's going to blend those two colors depending on the value in your blender. If you're all the way to 0, it's going to be fully one color. If you're all the way to 1, it's going to be fully the other color. And then if you're somewhere in between there, it's going to blend them according to that. So this node was designed for doing colors. In fact, if I go in the channel box, you'll see that color 1 has an R, G, and a B setting, and color 2 has an RG and a B. So RG and a B setting. So it's for RGB values, right? What people have sort of realized is that you can plug in really any three numbers into there, and it will blend between them. So it doesn't have to be colors. It can be the three rotate values. So we got rotate X, Y, and Z, that, you know, 3 of them, which is convenient because colors come in 3 values as well. If I open this up, you have color 1, R, G, and B. So if I plug in my rotates into color 1, then it's going to just treat those 3 numbers as 3 numbers. It doesn't have to be colors. So that's what we're going to do. So what we're going to do is we're going to plug the FK hip into color 1 and the IK hip into color 2. And then we're going to take the output and put the output of this into the rotate values of the bind hip. And which one it follows is going to depend entirely on, if I double click this, the blender value. And this blender value, as you can see, runs from 0 to 1, which is very convenient because our IK to FK attribute, which is this one here, runs from 0 to 1. See how this works? So that will then be our blender attribute. So if we click on this and drag a connection to the blender, you'll see that now if I double click this, you'll see that my blender is yellow, meaning there's a direct connection. And if I change this value here to 1, then I go back to my blender, you'll see that my blender is 1. Okay, so that is going to determine how these things are blended together. Okay, so next thing we have to do is plug in the joints. So I don't even have to open these. I'm going to close all these down here just to keep our nodes as small as possible. I'm going to take all the rotate values for the FK and plug them in there. So make sure that the FK goes into color 1 and the IK goes into color 2. Now when I do that, this is what happens. I get a conversion node, and usually I'll hit 1 to collapse that node. So because this was designed for colors and we're giving it basically degree values, because these are rotations, there has to be a conversion that happens, right? So the conversion node is going to do that for us. It's going to take the rotational values and convert them into something that this blend colors node can use. Okay, and again, I'm going to take the rotates from here and plug them in there, and again my that creates a conversion node here. I'm just going to hit 1 to collapse it, and again the node editor is annoying in that these nodes for some reason decide to appear over there. I don't know what it is, why it does that, but that's what it does. Okay, then we can take the output of this and plug into rotate on the bind, and again I have to go find this node and do that just to keep things neat. I like to have it arranged like this. And now that I have those connected, I'm just going to select each node and hit 2 to make it smaller so that it's not taking up a lot of space in my graph. Okay, so we have the FK and IK going in here, and then the output goes to the bind value. So whatever value is in, so if I select my IKFK switcher and set it to 1, that means I am in FK mode, and FK mode is the color 1. So FK mode is here, and if I'm at a value of 1, then we are at in FK mode. So that is going to mean that the values that are coming out of the FK joint get shoved through this system and plugged into the bind chain. If I set the IK to FK to 0, that's going to enable the color 2 value. So the values that are coming into color 2 from the IK hip are then going to be plugged into that bind joint chain. So let's test that out. I'm going to shift this over here, and then I'm going to select that IKFK switcher right here. And if I go back and forth, you'll see that at the hip, obviously I haven't done the knee and down yet, but at the hip, as I go back and forth by just scrubbing, selecting this attribute and scrubbing with my middle mouse button left and right, if I'm at 1, I'm in FK. If I'm at 0, I'm in IK. You see how that works? So that is our IK-FK switching. Now, we need to do it for the rest of them. So now that we've got the hips done, I'm going to go ahead and select the knees. So 1, 2, the 3 knee joints, and let's bring those in here and hit the plus. And as usual, it's going to just put them on top of each other, and I'm going to have to separate them. So this is the bind, so it goes over here. This is the IK, and this is the FK. Okay, so IK, FK, bind. So instead of making a new one of these, I'm just going to duplicate it. And before I do that, I should probably name this. I'm going to call this left hip blender. Okay, so let's duplicate it. Control D, drag it down here. And this is the left knee blender. Get rid of that one. Left knee blender. And again, we're just going to do the same setup that we did up here, down here. So we're going to take rotate of the FK to call, oh, that's not what I wanted to do. Shrink that back down. So rotates to color 1, rotates of IK to color 2. And again, we have 2 conversion nodes that pop up in here, which I want to collapse. So this one goes here, this one goes here. Okay. And then the output goes into rotate on the bind knee. Bring this node down. That gets really annoying, but you know, you have to get used to it, I guess. Then I'm just going to hit 2 on these just to collapse them down a little bit. I don't collapse them all the way. If I hit 1, it's going to collapse them all the way. I'm just going to hit 2 so I can see exactly what's connected, because if I hit 1, then I don't know what's being connected. At 2, I can tell that it rotates. So that's what we have there. And I can take all of this and move it up here. So if we test it, you can see now that the knees are aligning too. Okay. And there we go. So we need to go and do the ankles. So I'm going to select all 3 ankle joints. That one. Actually, I think I need to select them both that way. And that one. And let's bring this back. And let's add those to the graph. Slide them down here. So this is FK. This is bind, and this is IK. So it's very important that you remember that IK goes into color 2 and FK goes into color 1. You have to be consistent. You can do them the other way if you want, but be consistent. Whichever way you choose, make sure you're consistent. Okay, let's duplicate this guy. And the duplicate is up there. Move him down here. And this is the left ankle blender. Okay, oh, and then one thing that we did forget to do is connect the blender to this guy. So I'm going to put that to the blender. And let's, while we're at it, let's go ahead and connect it down here as well. Okay, that's something that is easy to forget, and then you wonder why the leg's not working. That's why. Okay, so rotate from FK goes to color 1. Rotate from IK goes to color 2, and then the output goes to the rotate on the bind, and then I can go get my 3 conversion nodes. And this one goes here, this one goes here, and this one goes here. Okay, and then I'm just gonna collapse these down just a little bit here. Okay, so we have hip, knee, and ankle. Now we need the ball. So let's go ahead and get the ball on each of these. And again, we have to select because these are on top of each other. So bring those in, hit the plus, drag them down here. So you can see it's pretty repetitive, pretty simple though. There's your bind, there's your FK, and there's your IK. Let's duplicate this. Go get it, and for some reason it appears way up there. And I'm just going to get my IKFK switcher here and move it down. Okay, just to make it easier to see, and then take that IK to FK and throw it on the blender. Then rotate color 1, IK rotate color 2, output the rotate of the bind, then go get our nodes. And this one goes here, this one goes here, and this one goes here. And these two to collapse them down. And there we go. So that is down to the ball. We don't need to do the toe because the toe joints don't really do anything. So let's test this and make sure that everything lines up the way that we want it to. And it looks like it does. And you can see that if I sort of go slowly, you can see the bind chain cycling between the two joints. So that's our IKFK switching right there. So that now if I'm here and I move this, you'll see that my bind chain is just going to stay with this IK joint chain. And then if I decide that I want to be in FK mode, then I do that, and you'll see that this control moves with the bind chain, so you know that's kind of how you know which mode you're in. And if I rotate this, you'll see that the bind chain does not separate from that FK chain because it's stuck to it. Okay, so that is IKFK switching. You just got to know how to connect some nodes. It's very easy to make a mistake, so make sure that you are paying attention to what you're doing, and it's not that hard to get everything done the way that you want it to be. Okay, all right, so now we got to do the right side, and since it's more repetitive stuff, I'm just gonna speed through it. Okay, so we have our IKFK switching working on both sides. This is the graph right here. Pretty looks like a lot of stuff. It's not really that bad. Make sure that the IKFK is hooked into all four of those, and you can tell by looking at here. There's 4 connections, and that's good. And if we find the other one, there are 4 connections. That is good. So everything should be hooked up as you want it to be. And last thing I'm going to do is lock this IKFK switch tab, so that if I make new objects or whatever it is, usually if that's not locked, those objects are going to automatically be put into the graph. So I'm just going to lock it to prevent that. Okay, so the next thing that we have to do, because as you can see, we got a lot of clutter going on here with all the joint chains being visible. So I'm going to go and find them in my under my pelvis joint here, and I'm going to hide everything but the bind. So left and right IKFK, select those, hide them. So as you can see now, it might be a little bit clearer what's going on with this bind chain. If I'm switching back and forth, I'm going between FK, which is this one. If I rotate this, you'll see that my bind chain rotates. And then if I go to IK, you'll see that I'm here now, and I can go with the IK joint chain. And this is happening on both sides. But the issue that we have is that the controls are always visible, and they're kind of in the way here. So what we're going to do is set up visibility switching for the controls so that when I'm in IK mode, that the IK controls appear and the FK controls disappear, and vice versa. So again, let's go into the node editor. We use the node editor quite a bit because it is pretty useful. So let's go and make a new tab here. So that one's locked, and I'm going to call this one control visibility. Control visibility. I hope I spelled that right. Visibility. Yeah, I think that's right. Okay, so the way that we're going to do this for the FK side, it's pretty simple. So again, I'm going to select my IKFK switch control. I'm going to add that. Then I'm also going to add the, and it's important that we do this from the buffers. And all I really need to do is the hip control, because as you can see, if I select my hip control buffer here and hit Control H, it hides all those FK controls. So I'm going to Control Shift H to undo that. So I'm going to bring in my left hip control buffer as my for that, and all I'm going to do here is just plug in, and remember that on that hip control buffer we locked in hit all attributes except for visibility. This is why I'm going to take my IK to FK and plug it directly into visibility. Okay, why do I do that? Because again, my IK to FK attribute right here runs from 0 to 1, and we know that visibility in Maya is an on and off switch. It's either on or it's off. And on in Maya is a value of 1. Well, technically it's anything but 0, but we'll say it's a value of 1, and off is a value of 0. So when we're at IK FK value of 0, that means we're in IK mode, so we want those FK controls to be off. So we just plug this directly, and it's just going to feed that 0 or 1 into the visibility of the hip control buffer. So the other two that we have to do is the IK controls. So left knee pole vector buffer and left foot control buffer, we got to bring those in. Now with these, we can't just plug them in directly because these have to be inverted, right? When our IKFK value is at 1, we want the visibility for these two controls to be at 0. So we have to use a little trickery to sort of flip that so that it's the right way around. Okay, so we're going to use a condition node. So I'm just going to enlarge this, and we're going to use a condition node here. So again, I'm just going to hit tab and start typing in condition, and then select it from the list. So what is a condition node? So let's double click it and pull up our, oh, I picked the color condition. I didn't want that. So tab condition. There it is. All right, there's our condition node. So we have, if I double click it, it's going to open it in my attribute editor. We have a first term and a second term and an operation, color of true, color of false. So the first term and the second term are the two numbers that are going to be compared. Okay, and those of you that are familiar with programming, this is like an if statement. Okay, so the first term and the second term are going to be compared according to the operation defined here. And this is equal. So it's going to say if the first term is equal to the second term, it's going to output this value if it's true, and then output this value if it's false. And again, this condition node is generally meant for use with colors. And if I open this up, you'll see that I have color, false, R, G, and B. So generally it's meant for use with colors, but we're not even going to use it with colors. We're just going to have it check what the value is and then output a value accordingly. So, and we're just going to use the R column. We're not going to use the G and the B columns, okay? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my IK to FK, plug it into the first term. Okay, so it's going to come in as either a 1 or a 0, and I'm going to leave the second term at 0. So if the first term comes in at a 1 and the second term's at a 0, these are not equal, so this is going to return false. So I want this, so I'm going to, just to demonstrate here, I'm going to set this to 0, because we know that when IK to FK is at 0, we're in IK mode. So what that's going to do is it's going to bring a 0 in here. It's going to compare these two. Are they equal? Yes. So if that is true, we don't want to output a 0, we want to output a 1. And if it's false, we want to output a 0. And the reason we output a 1 is so that if we're in IK mode, that we say we output a 1, which is going to plug into the visibility and set that visibility to on. Okay, and if these numbers are not equal, it's going to output a 0, which is going to turn off these IK controls. So I'm going to open out my out color and take the out color R to visibility for this one and this one. There we go. Okay, so, and again, I'm just going to hit 2 to collapse these down to something more manageable. Maybe do the same with this guy here. Okay, so if you're going into FK mode, you just plug in the number directly. It's going to be 0 or 1, but because the IK controls have to be inverted, this is how we do it. We tell it to look at these two numbers. If they're equal, then output a 1. If they're not equal, output a 0. And it's just going to give us the opposite value of what the IK to FK is. So let's test that out. Looking at just the left side here, the red ones. So if I go IK to FK, you'll see when I go to FK mode, my FK controls show up and my IK controls are now gone. And if I go back, FK controls disappear, IK controls appear. Okay, let's do it on the right side. So again, let's make this smaller. Okay, so let's select our, let's do it in the outliner, our right IKFK switch. Let's close this. I'm going to turn shapes off. Our right IKFK switch, our right hip control buffer, and bring those in. Here we go. Let's move these over here. So again, because FK, you can just plug in directly. Okay, I'm just going to duplicate my condition node, and what do we call this condition node here? We're going to call this left control. Let's call this left leg control viz. Okay, and we're going to duplicate this node here, and this one we're going to call right leg control viz. Oops, lost my underscore. There it is. So right leg control viz, and then we need to bring in the right knee PV and the right foot control buffer. Put them in there, bring them here, plug this into the first term, and again it's 0 and they're equal. We're going to put out a 1, otherwise put out a 0, and then take out color R, plug it into the visibility channel on these. Okay, so the same setup as we have there. Then I'm going to take these 3 nodes here, hit 2 just to, you know, make it neater, and just put these next to each other like that. And now we can lock this one as well. So these two are both locked. Okay, I'm just going to save my work. Make sure you do that a lot. So you can see our scene is a lot cleaner now. If I go back and forth just to make sure this works, if I'm in FK mode, you'll see that my controls pop up. If I go back and forth. All right, so there we have it. Okay. And there we go. So I'm just going to return my controls back to 0 here. Let's make sure we get all that. Okay, and then I'm going to switch to FK mode. And I'm going to select all these controls. and set my rotates to 0. Now, something that you might want to consider as far as the FK knees, knees tend to just bend one way, which is this way. They tend to not bend side to side like that, or they tend to not twist either. So what I like to do is I'm going to select both these knee joints, and I only need to rotate on Y, so I'm going to hide rotate X and Y. I'm sorry, X and Z. So lock and hide selected. So my knees now only have rotate Y values. It is up to you if you want to do it that way. Some riggers just like to give the animator the ability to do what they want and trust that the animator won't make things not look good. So it's up to you if you want to do that. I do. So that's what it is. So now that we've done that, we can now, for all these buffers, remember on the buffers we left the visibility, and now that we've connected it, just so that it doesn't get messed up, I'm going to lock and hide those. Okay, so now those are locked in there. No one can get to them unless they know what they're doing. Okay, and I'm going to save my work. Make sure that I have that saved. And then the next thing I want to do is then start to, you know, all my stuff is just sort of sitting here, and it's not really laid out nicely or organized nicely, I should say. So I want to set up my rig structure, the hierarchy of the rig, so that the character can scale up and down, etc., etc. Okay, so first what we need to do is start to set up the group structure for the rig. So I'm going to deselect everything and then hit Control G. Let's go. I'm going to close all these down here because now that I'm done with them, I don't need all this stuff open. It's going to create a null node here. I'm going to call this character. And what this node would be is the top node of the rig. So this would be the name of the character. You know, if his name was Bob, that's what you'd put as the character name. That way, everything, the whole rig will be contained inside this one group node, so you could collapse down to this group node and have only one node in the outliner. Okay, this is going to be very helpful when you have, you know, a bunch of different characters in a scene. You can just collapse them all down and see where everything is. So I want to contain all my stuff in a single node that's going to keep it nice and neat and clean. Okay, so that's the first node that we're going to create. Then we're going to make a master control. And again, I'm just going to use my curved box that I created earlier. I'm going to duplicate it and then take the duplicate, and let's move this up here. I'm just going to snap my pivot down to the bottom of that, then hold down X so that it sits on the floor. And now that we have that there, so bring it down a little bit, but then scale it out this way around the character, and let's bring back the character. We want it to be, you know, big enough to grab, but not overly big. And we want it to be three-dimensional like this, because again, if you have a floor plane there, sometimes if it's too flat, you can't select it through the floor plane. So I'm going to give it some dimension there, and we're going to call this master control. Okay, so freeze transformations on it. Again, with controls, always make sure that they're frozen. Okay, so the master control, I'm going to middle mouse drag that inside of the character group. So if I open that's the next node down. Okay, so next I'm going to deselect everything. Oh, and for the master control, I'm going to color code this a different color because it's not a left or a right. So I'm going to make this one. In fact, let me do this in the shape node. Let's go with yellow. So there we go, that yellow right there. Okay, so we're just going to make that one yellow. Save again. So deselect the master control, hit Control G and Control D to make the Control G makes an empty group node. Control D duplicates it. And let's see, how many times do I need to duplicate it? Let's make a total of 4 of them. So first one is joints. The next one is controls. The next one is geometry. And the next one is no scale. Okay, so joints and controls, I'm going to middle mouse under the master control. Geometry and no scale, I'm going to middle mouse under character, so those don't go under the master control. And this is very important, okay? This is, your geometry never gets scaled with the master control. The geometry is going to automatically scale up with the character because it's bound to the character. Okay. And actually what we can do is we can take geometry and put it underneath the no scale group because it's not supposed to scale. So this is the setup here. We got the main character node. Under that we have a master control and the no scale. Under the master control we have joints and controls, and under the no scale we have geometry. Okay. Next thing that we're going to do, so you know, if we want to, we can take this geometry of this character and middle mouse drag it and put it in the geometry group and just let it sit there so that it's not just hanging out in the middle of nowhere. Okay. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to take all our joints and put them in the joints group. See, now that all that's in there, we're going to take all these controls and put those in the controls group. Okay, so controls are all there, joints are all in here. You see how this is now starting to look a lot more organized. And if I collapse this down to the single node, you can see that all that stuff that was just littered around here now is just locked up inside that character node. And we have our curve box here is the only thing that is not inside of there because we don't need it inside of there. Okay, then the next thing, well, let's see if this works. So if you see now, if I scale things up and down, the character will scale up and down. Now the geometry again is not scaling because it's not bound to the character yet. Once we skin the character, when I do this, he's going to scale too. Okay, so we've set up our character in such a way that the things that need to scale will scale, and the things that don't need to scale will not scale. Okay, next thing we need to do is make a, let's see, where are we here? Okay, so master control, we need to make it so that we can't, I'm going to hide my character again here. So as you can see, if I go like this, I'm squashing the character. I don't want to be able to do that. I need this thing to always scale up and down uniformly. So I need to hide scale X and Z and just have those X and Z values take the value from the Y value. Okay, so that the easy way to do that is just go into the node editor again. Make a new tab. I'm going to bring in my master control and I'm going to open my rotates. Okay, I'm going to take the output. Remember, there's two sides to a node. There's the input side on the left and there's the output side on the right. I'm going to take the output rotate Y and I'm going to drag it into rotate Z, and I'm going to take it again and drag it into rotate X. So what that does for me is that no matter what I do, let's see. So yeah. So rotate Y. Oh, actually, you know what? That was wrong. It wasn't supposed to be rotate. It was supposed to be scale. So made a mistake there. Let's close. I'm still stuck on working with rotates from the IKFK switching. So scale. Do it in the scale. So take the output of scale Y, put it in scale Z. Take the output and put it in scale X inputs. So what that does now is if I just scale in the Y, you'll see that they all change, right? No matter what I do to the Y, it's going to put those same values in the X and Z. And now that that's working, I can simply select X and Z, right click on it, go to lock and hide selected. So now I have just scale Y that's active, X and Z are inactive, but when I scale on Y, it's going to scale the whole thing. Okay, so that's a quick, easy one to do. All right, so there we go. Now, another thing we can do is add a pelvis control just so that we can move the hips. So I'm just going to make a curve again, a circle curve, and then snap it to my pelvis joint. I'm going to bring back my character here, and I'm going to scale this out so it's big enough for me to grab. And we'll call this the pelvis control. Wow, let me take my caps lock off there. Pelvis control. And again, because it is a control, we need to make sure that the values are nice and clean. So I'm going to freeze transformations where it is. I'm going to hide the character, and you know, I like to mess with it just a little bit, give it some shape here. So I'm going to set the sections to 20. This is under inputs on the make nerve circle 1. And I'm going to right click to go into control vertex, and I'm going to select, say, every other vertex here. There. And you know, scale them. It gives us a nice little shape. And if you want, you can even, you know, do something like that. Whatever works for you. I'll call that good. And when you're done with that, just freeze transformations. And let's change the color to, let's do the shape node. And make it that same yellow as the master control. There. Okay, so we still have history, so freeze history, delete history as well, which is that button right there. Okay. We need to make a buffer for this control here, so I'm just going to Control G to group it to itself, and then its pivot is down there by default, so I'm going to hold down D and V and snap the pivot to the pelvis joint, and then this is pelvis, let's see, pelvis control buffer. Okay, and just for now, I'm going to go back and just select the actual control. Shift select the pelvis joint and control, and then constrain parent. So if I now rotate this, you can see that I can rotate the legs, and because we're in FK mode, the legs go with it. If I take these and switch them both to IK mode, you'll see that, and if I move this, even though it's breaking my skeleton, you'll see that my legs stay where they're supposed to be. Okay, and I think this pole vector is not. There we go. And yeah, that one's good. So again, we have our legs working, and then we have full hip control here, so on and so forth. Okay. So now that we have our pelvis control set up, we have to put it in the controls group again, just so that everything works. You can see that now it scales up just fine, and we can rotate the character, move it around, scale it, and it is just fine. Okay, so the next thing that we want to set up in here now is excuse me, is our space switching. So what is space switching? That is just a way to allow, we're going to work on the foot controls and the pole vectors, to have the pole vectors either stay in sort of the world space, or if we want them to move with the character, we can do that, and I'll show you what I mean here in a minute. Okay, so deselect everything and create a new group. Just hit Control G when you've deselected everything. We'll call this left leg world. Okay, and you know, while we're at it, I'm just going to select that and duplicate it and call this one right leg world. Okay, we're going to parent constrain these to the master control. So we're going to select the master control, select the left one, constrain parent, select the master control, select the right one, hit G for repeating the last command. Okay, then now that we have those done, I'm going to start on the left side here. I'm going to parent constrain this foot control buffer. Make sure it's the buffer, not the control. I'm going to parent it to the left leg world. So I'm going to select left leg world and foot control buffer, constrain, and it is a parent. Oh, and you know, now we're going to get an error here, as you can see, could not add constraints or connections. Why is that? That's because we locked and hid everything. So this is a good time to show you how to get your attributes back after you've hidden them. So select that buffer. In fact, I'm going to select the right foot control buffer as well, just so we do them both at the same time. Then we're going to go to let's see, Windows, General Editors, and we're going to go to Channel Control. Okay, so in the Channel Control, this shows you all the channels that are available. You'll see that under Keyable we have just visibility, and of course the reason that we only have visibility is because we locked and hid everything else. Now non-keyable hidden is all those ones, all the different attributes that are associated with any object, and you'll see that there's a lot of attributes here. Most of these you don't really need. And you'll see that we have our scales. We locked and hid those. We don't need to bring those back. Parent constraints only work on translates and rotates. So I'm going to get my rotates, and then I'm going to scroll down and find my translate. Hold down Control, click and drag, and then I'm going to move them back. I'm going to use this move with the arrows pointing to the left to send them back into the keyable. But you'll see that they are, because they are gray, means that they're locked. So I could either just select them here, right click, lock, unlock selected, or I can go here where it says locked, get my rotates and translates, and then move them over to the right. Now they are, for both of these, they are available. So again, let's see, left leg world, left foot control buffer, constrain, parent, right leg world, right foot control buffer, constrain, parent. Okay, so then I'm going to select the pelvis joint, and I'm going to constrain the left foot control buffer, constrain parent, and then select the pelvis, and the right foot control buffer, constrain parent. Okay, so if you look at this, we have that right leg world as one of the constraints, and then the pelvis as the other constraint. Okay, so if I turn off the pelvis one just by typing 0 in there, so what this is going to do is that if I then, when I rotate this, you'll see that I have, and I'm looking at the right foot. Forget about what the left foot is doing right now because it's not looking good, but we're not looking at that one. Looking at the right foot, this one right here, you'll see that as I rotate the pelvis, the foot stays where it is. But if I go back in that right foot control buffer and then flip these, so 0 on this one and 1 on the pelvis, now if I rotate this, you'll see that that right foot goes with the pelvis. So this is what the space switching is about. You can have that sort of move with the pelvis or stay put. And this is a feature that some animators will find useful, so I throw it in there just in case. Okay, so now we want to be able to control that. We don't want the animator to have to go to the buffer to turn this on and off. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to both these foot controls, I'm going to go to modify, add attribute. So select both foot controls, modify, add attribute, and we're going to call this world orient. Okay, and this is going to be an enum attribute, and we're going to make two attributes, one called world and one called a figure. So enum attributes just give you an attribute. It gives you an attribute that has a drop down with different and you can name the options for the drop down here. So we have world and figure, and we're going to hit OK. Okay, and that should have made that for both of them. Oh, no, I don't think it did. It just made it for that one, so I got to do it again here. So modify, add attribute. Again, enum attribute, world orient, Okay, and this is world and figure. Oops. Figure. And why didn't you change? Let's try that again. World. There we go. And you gotta be careful with this window. Okay. Hopefully now we are fine. Hit OK, and there it is. You got world and figure right there. And the same with this one. You got world and figure right there. So now we need to have this set it up so that this drives what we want it to drive. So I'm going to go in my rigging menu here, and this again is my set driven key. So I'm going to open that up. Okay, I'm going to load the left foot control as the driver. Select world orient. Then I'm going to go into, so in the left foot control buffer, if I open that up, you're going to find a constraint underneath there. So load that as the driven, and I'm going to select both of these constraints. Okay, so when we have our foot control at world, we want the world to be 1 and the pelvis to be 0. Okay, let's see, am I getting that right? Yeah, so world orient, and then 1 and 0, and then select these and set a key. Then I'm going to set this to figure, go back to the constraint, 0, 0, and 1. Just make them, flip them backwards, and set a key. Let's make sure that that worked. So right now, this leg is in figure, so it should follow the pelvis. It does, as you can see. And then when I set this to world, that should stay where it is, and that's what it's doing. So let's do it for the right side. Load driver here, and then open up the right foot control buffer, load that constraint, load that in the driven, and there we go. Let us set this 1 and 0 first. Set a key, set this to figure, set this to 0 and 1, and key. Okay, so right now it's set to figure, so it's going to move with it. Let's go here, set it to world, and you'll see it snaps back, and now those feet don't go anywhere. Okay, so that's very simple, quick space switching. I think I'm going to leave the defaults at world, because that is the default action of IK. IK legs is that you want to plant those feet. So make sure you save your work. And moving on, we want to do the same thing for the knee, the pole vectors. So let's see here. So I'm going to select my left foot control right here. Then I'm going to parent constrain my left knee PV buffer. So constrain parent. Oh, and again, we got to take these and bring back our channels. And just to make my life easier, Windows General Editors channel control, instead of clicking it directly, I'm going to hold down Control and Shift, and watch what happens right here. I'm going to get a new button here. So General Editors, channel control, hold down Control and Shift and click on it. Now I have my channel control right there. So if I click on that, we have that. Again, let's make sure we have both of these selected, and we want to bring back our rotates and translates. So let's start with the translates. No, sorry, on the buffers. There we go. So translate XYZ and rotate XYZ and move those across here. And then you can just unlock them by selecting them and unlock selected. Okay, let's try that again. Select left foot control, then select the left knee PV buffer. Make sure it's the buffer, not the control. See, the control's inside of the buffer. Constrain parent. Same thing on this side, right foot control, right knee PV, constrain parent. Okay. And then we want to constrain again pelvis to left knee PV buffer, constrain parent, pelvis to right knee PV buffer, hit G, and then we also want to constrain them to left leg world, or the leg worlds. So left leg world, left knee PV buffer, hit G, right leg world, right knee PV buffer, hit G. So we have constrained the knee pole vectors to 3 different things. If you look right here, we have the foot control, the pelvis, and the world group. Okay, so now we need to, again, we're going to select both of these pole vector controls, and we're going to go to modify. We're going to add attributes again. This time we're going to add, again, it's an enum. This one is also going to be called world orient, and it's going to be hip and foot. And to get the third value, you just click below that last one. There's like an empty box there, and we're going to name that one world. Okay, then hit OK. And again, yeah, hip, yeah, okay, so it did add them there. Okay, so we have hip, foot, and world on both of those. So, and let's just make sure here. Yep. So, space switching again, open up your set driven key. I'm going to load up my left one. World orient is what we're working with here. And let's load up the driven, which is going to be the constraint, load driven, and I'm going to select these 3. Now for this, by default, my default is hip, so I'm going to set my pelvis. So with this selected, set the pelvis, select this, and then pelvis should be 1, and the others should be 0 for the hip, and set a key. Then go to foot, come back here, and we want the foot control to be 1, pelvis 0, set a key, come back here, go to world, and again we want these to be 0 and this one 1. Okay, and key. All right, what did that do? So right now we are at world, so it should just be like the default behavior. It should not move. It's not moving. And we're looking at the left one. The right one is not set up yet, so it's doing weird things. World, if we go to hip, then as I move my hips, you'll see that that left pole vector goes with the hip. If I switch this to foot, then when I rotate this, nothing happens. But when I move the foot, it goes with the foot. Okay, so if I move the foot, that pole vector is going to go with it. It's no longer going with the pelvis. So that's what I want. So let's put this back down. All right, let's do the same on the right side. It's so bring in the control as the driver. Bring in the right knee constraint as the driven. And again, because we are starting with hip, we're going to make the pelvis, pelvis 1 and the other one 0. Set a key, go back here, set it to foot, come back here, foot 1, pelvis 0, world 0. Key that, come back here, set it to world. Set this 0 there, 0 foot, 0 pelvis, 1 world, and key. And again, let's test it. When it's at world, pelvis doesn't move it, and the foot doesn't move it. When it is at hip, it moves with the pelvis, does not move with the foot. Okay, when it is set to foot, pelvis has no effect on it, but the foot does. Okay, so that looks like it's working just fine. All right, so there we go with that. Now what we want to remember to do is that because on the buffers we brought back our translates and rotates on the foot controls and the pole vectors, we're just going to go ahead and actually we can hide everything now, including the visibility. So lock and hide selected for everything. Okay, so all these are now locked and hidden. Nobody can mess with your connections unless they know what they're doing and they go in there. And there we go. So save your work. This is going along pretty well. All right, now the other thing that we want to do, I'm going to close my set driven key. We want to put switches on the master control that are going to hide the joints, or the controls, or the geometry. Okay, just to make it easier for the animator, we're going to add that to the master control. So with the master control selected, I'm going to go to modify, add attribute, the first one, and these are going to be Boolean attributes, and Boolean attributes are simple on and off switches. There's no in between. It's either on or it's off, which is going to work just fine for what we're doing here. Okay, so the first one is going to be geometry, and then add, and then joints, add, and then controls, and add that. Hit OK. So you can see they default to off. So what we need to do is back in our node editor, and again, you know, this is a very useful thing, and since this tab was already had the master control in here, this is what we're going to do. Okay, so I'm going to load in my joints, controls, and geometry groups, load those in here, get my master control, and just move it back here. Okay, so this is what we need to do. So we have controls, geometry, and joints. So pretty simple. Just drag this to visibility on each one. So joints to joints, geometry, or wait, that's controls. So oops, undo that. Controls to controls, and geometry to the visibility of geometry. So pretty simple. Just select these and hit 2 to make them smaller so that they take up less room, just so we can see what's going on. So because those are on and off switches, again, visibility is an on and off switch as well. So those match up really nicely. And as you can see, because everything defaulted to off, everything is gone. So if I go to my joints and turn those on, I get my joints back. If I go to controls, turn those on, I get my controls back. And if I go to geometry, turn that on, and if I here, let me show this. So let's turn off geometry, and you can see that it disappears. Turn it back on, the geometry appears. So this is just a nice thing for the animator if they don't want to see something. And for example, joints, when an animator is animating, they don't necessarily need to see the joints, so you can just turn them off right there. And when they want to look at their animation with all the controls on it, you can simply turn off controls, and the character is going to be just the only control visible will be the master control, and that's all they need to see. So, you know, for right now, I'm going to leave everything on. Okay, and close that. Now, these leg whirl things, we're going to just take these two and put them in the no scale group. I think that should work. So if I now scale everything up, hold on a sec. It should. Okay, so we're having, as you can see with those foot controls, if I put this into, let's put them under the master control and see what happens. Okay, there we go. So that works. When you put those under the master control, the rig scales up, scales down, no problem. Okay, so we're going to put those under the master control. If you don't want to have them directly under the master control, you can put them in either one of these groups. I guess we can throw them in the controls group, see if that doesn't break anything. Yeah, so that's fine. Just so to keep it clean, I'm going to put it under the controls group. Okay, so there we go. Everything looks like it's working. We have the legs basically done. We have the rig structure created, so from now on, every time we create new joints, we're just going to put them in the joints group. Anytime we make new controls, they're going to go in the controls group. And if we do that, the rig will stay scalable. It'll work no matter what we do. And so now we're ready to go on to the next part, which I believe is going to be the arms. Now the arms are pretty much the same as the feet, with a couple exceptions, because we do have the forearm joint and we have to account for forearm twisting. So there will be a few differences, but in general it's going to be pretty similar. All right, well guys, if you enjoyed the videos, please feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. You know, we're building up the videos. Channel's still pretty new and pretty small, but you know, I keep adding videos and we're getting there. So any support that you can give would be appreciated. And we'll see you in the next video to rig the arms.